Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast from CityWorks Expo. My name is Brad Stevens, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our guest today, Miss Melody Warnick, perhaps best known as the author of This Is Where You Belong. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Of course, it's an absolute pleasure, and we were blessed to have you at our Expo event last year, and you just, I think, captivated our entire audience.
Well, thank you. That is such a great conference to go to, and such a fantastic crowd. For me, it was really preaching to the choir, probably, of people who are already really devoted to their place, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, good. We always like to get our guests to give a little pitch in there for CityWorks, so thank you.
Right. little plug in there. Go to CityWorks. So.
Now, how do you kind of define what you're doing these days? Do you think of yourselves mainly as an author, or how do you define it?
I do, and it's funny, though, because I used to be a writer who wrote about a lot of different topics for magazines and websites and things like that. That was my career. And a few years ago, I became really captivated by this idea of place. What makes us feel rooted in a place? What makes a city or a town the right place for us? And how we can give back to those places where we've landed and how we can put down roots. I have spent a lot of time moving around, ever since I graduated from college. My husband and I, and then later our two kids, found ourselves moving every few years. And, we'd move for good reasons, like college or jobs. But I found that all that moving made me pay a lot of attention to place and how these different communities that I was living in affected my life, and how in some places I seemed to feel more comfortable than in others. And it made me start researching this idea of place attachment, the emotional bond we have with our place. And that became a passion of mine, which turned into the book, This Is Where You Belong. And so, the book has been out almost a year. It came out June 2016. And ever since then, I have kind of been a champion of place and place attachment. I've been speaking at different places around the country and writing about place. And so I think of myself as an author, but also as someone who advocates for people to become happier where they live.
I love that happiness piece. That's such a compelling part of it. Have you found during all your travels and conversations that have happened since the book has been released that your kind of conviction about these issues has changed in any way?
I think if anything, it's grown stronger. I really, I believe that people can have an enormous influence about how they feel about their town. I was hoping all along that the message of the book would be a message of empowerment. The book is divided into chapters based on things you can do where you live right now to feel better about it. Based on my experience moving to Blacksburg, Virginia, and wanting to have this just be the place where I wanted to live forever, and finding that once I got here, I didn't really like it that much. It was not my dream town. And I recognized that, my husband had a good job here. My kids had been moved around a lot, and we needed to learn to settle down. And how was I going to do that? How was I going to learn to be happy in this place? So I did research into place attachment. And when I found a study that said, people who are place attached tend to volunteer more, I'd sort of reverse engineer it and say to myself, well, if place attached people do this, then I will too, in the hopes that it would make me feel more rooted. So the book is organized around these experiments that I did in my town and that other people can do in their towns. And at the end of every chapter, there's a checklist with more ideas, specific things you can do where you live. And as time has gone by, I've heard from a really gratifying number of readers who say, I've done these things in my town. I'm doing them based on your suggestions, and they are working. They have helped me. So I think, if anything, having some of that real life evidence that it isn't just me, it's this actually works for other people, has strengthened my sense that this is something that people can do no matter where they live, no matter how long they've been there, no matter how good or bad they feel about their city or town. You can increase your happiness and your love and your engagement where you live.
Well, I'm intrigued to know. I mean, what of these kind of experiments that you did you find kind of were the most impactful for you personally in terms of feeling at home in Blacksburg and creating a sense of belonging?
One of the things that really surprised me about how much it affected me was training myself to buy local. I've always been, a Target aficionado and an Amazon devotee, but that's just kind of how I shop. Like most Americans, big box stores and online is what we do. And as I started researching the book, part of what I wanted to write about when it comes to place is not only that we can do things to make ourselves happier and feel better about our town, but that as residents, we kind of owe our town some sense of duty, and that there are things that we can do that make our towns better. And buying local was at the top of that list. I learned that there's something called the local multiplier effect that says that when you shop at locally owned independent businesses, about 3 times as much money stays in your community as does when you shop at big box stores like Target or Best Buy. So knowing that buying local is really good for my town, I made this commitment that I was going to make an effort to buy more things from local, independent retailers, stores and businesses that were owned by people who lived in my town. And it was really kind of challenging at first. It can be a little inconvenient, maybe a little more expensive, but what I found that was really rewarding about it was I started to develop these relationships with people who worked in these stores. And one thing I talk about a lot is that I'm a huge introvert. I'm not a social butterfly. It can be sometimes painful, for me to go strike up a conversation with a stranger. And so I wasn't even sure that was something I wanted. Did I really want to be on a first name basis with the person at the hardware store? I wasn't sure. But as I sort of forced myself to do this, I found that I liked that. I liked walking into a store and having someone recognize me, or having someone, know my kids. I acknowledge up front that giving up big box stores and online shopping completely is a little bit of a pipe dream. And I haven't achieved that or anything even close to that. I will admit I still shop on Amazon, and I still buy things at Target. But what I've tried to do, and what I try and convince other people to do, is shift a little of your spending. For me, I made an effort to, pick 1 or 2 things that I was just always going to buy at locally owned stores, no matter what. So, there's a toy store in Blacksburg called Imaginations, and I decided that if I ever need a toy or a birthday present or something, we're going to go buy it at Imaginations, even though, maybe it would be cheaper to buy it off the Target clearance racks or buy it from Amazon. I wanted this business to stay there. I wanted to support it. So not only have I gotten to know the owner of Imaginations, Paula Bolte, really well, and she's delightful and will do anything for anyone. But I've also come to appreciate that a lot of these small businesses offer really great service. I can walk into Imaginations and say, I need a Christmas present for my nephew. And someone will come behind the counter and be like, okay, how old is he? And what's he interested in? And check out this game and this book. And then they wrap it for you for free. And it's really delightful. So, there's research that shows they're called commercial friendships. Those relationships you develop with the person at the grocery store who checks you out, or the guy at the dry cleaner or something. They're kind of not real legit friendships, but they're social capital. This is expanding our network of loose ties in our community, and those are the kinds of things that sort of tie us emotionally in place. They make us feel known where we live, and I found that I liked being known where I lived. There's some value to some anonymity sometimes, but on the other hand, it's nice to walk into a store and have someone say, "Hey, Melody, we're glad you're here," and it's like cheers, and everyone likes cheers.
Well, in some ways, it sounds like what you're describing. One of the words that you said at the beginning there kind of struck me in terms of almost a duty to your community, so that this is in some ways about moving beyond just thinking individualistically and moving to some kind of collective thinking, and thinking about, to quote JFK, not what can you do for me, but what can I do for my community. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not super sexy, it's not necessarily, the funnest idea that you should do these things out of duty to your town. But on the other hand, I think a lot of us really want a sense of meaning in our lives. We want to feel like we're contributing to something bigger than ourselves. And getting involved in and attached to your community, or simply becoming more mindful of it, is a way to add a lot of meaning to your life. You are, even when you're shopping or you're choosing the restaurant you're going to eat at, you are doing something that is good, not just for you, but for other people. It's a little bit altruistic, and altruism makes us feel really good, and it makes us healthier, and obviously it has a really big impact on our towns, that we can make our towns better simply by choosing to do that.
Well, I think that's one of the really interesting parts of this for me, is that you talk about, what kind of the happiness and the purpose that we get out of place attachment, that it's very good for us as people, but also that when you look at those places that have higher levels of place attachment, it's much better for the community itself as well. That you mentioned health and stuff there, but there are serious benefits to places that can generate place attachment.
Right. One of the things that was really interesting that came up in the research about place attachment came from something called the Soul of the Community study that was done a few years ago by the Knight Foundation and Gallup, the people who do all the polls. And they wanted to know what made people feel really engaged and attached in their cities or their towns. So they did this enormous survey, 26,000 people in 26 different cities and towns across the country, all different size places and different demographics. And they would ask people questions about, how well do you like it here, and what makes you like it, and things like that. And then when they crunched the numbers, they boiled it down to 3 factors that drive place attachment in all of these towns. That, the same 3 factors rose to the top over and over again. And they were social offerings, or feeling like there were things to do in your town and people to do them with; aesthetics, or feeling like the place you lived was pleasing to the eye, it was beautiful in some way; an openness or feeling like your town was welcoming to all kinds of people and offered opportunity to different kinds of people. So when people thought that their community did well on those three things, social offerings, aesthetics, and openness, they tended to be more place attached. And the really interesting thing was that towns that had a lot of place attached residents had higher GDPs. The town did better economically. It produced more and made more money than towns with less attached residents. So, it's, in some ways being place attached, which I sometimes call, that no place like home feeling, is it's a little bit emotional. It's kind of just like, oh, I feel good living here. And that's nice. But when a lot of people feel that way, it can really change things for a town. It can, drive the economy in a town, and it can also encourage, the opening of businesses. New businesses come there. People want to settle there because they sense that there's something good going on in this town. People are happy to live here. There's an energy in the town, and, people aren't necessarily saying we're all place attached, but it's something that outsiders even can usually sense that, this is a town that people love living in, and I want to be in a town like that. So let's move here. Let's bring our business here.
That's really interesting. And it's, I think you could probably speak to the fact that really there can be a vast difference between people that grow up and live their entire lives in one place versus people that have moved into a place. But I wonder, how do you, in some ways it's very easy to think of investing when we have a privileged position to come from. But how do you think, we can leverage and expand place attachment for disadvantaged populations and kind of make them feel more welcome in their own communities?
Yeah. So Richard Florida talks about there are three different kinds of people in America when it comes to geography. So there are people who are mobile, and those tend to be people who are a little better off economically. They tend to be younger, and these are people who are just, moving from place to place, chasing jobs, and they haven't really settled down yet. Then there are people who are stuck, and those are people who, for whatever reason, often economics, but sometimes, family ties or, just, job opportunities or things like that feel, they don't love where they live, but they don't feel like they can leave it either. So they just kind of feel a little resentful. They feel stuck. The third group is people who are rooted. So rooted people could be either of those groups. They could be transplants, people who have been mobile and they've settled in a new community, or they could be people who, grew up someplace and never left. Rooted is more about a state of mind. It's about choosing to be where you are. So I think that's something that people can choose no matter what their economic background or their ethnic background, or, other factors, that even if from the outside it looks like, oh my gosh, you're stuck. You've been in this little tiny West Virginia coal mining holler, your whole life, and you should probably get out of there. You can choose to feel rooted and embrace your community. One of the stories that I talk about in the book is about a couple sisters who were living on a disadvantaged block in Philadelphia. And when the economic crash happened, they were underwater on this house that was kind of like their family house. So they couldn't move. They were stuck. And they started to see their street go downhill. It was full of vacant lots, and the people who were living there were all struggling financially, and it was it was all coming out in the street, a lot of blight and neglect. And they decided that we can either sit here and watch our street go downhill, or we can, try and do something about it. So they organized what they called Grow Your Block. And they got people to, hardware stores or Home Depot or whatever, to donate flowers and plants. And they got together with their neighbors and encouraged people to plant things in, the front yards of these sort of crumbling, neglected row houses. So this is not a panacea. This didn't make anyone wealthier. This didn't fix the real problems that they had in their community. But it had this, larger than life effect of making people feel like they had some control over their lives and that they could do something really small to make their neighborhood and their block feel and look better. So as people started, planting flowers and things, it gave the neighbors something nice to talk about. They developed a sense of ownership over their property. It looked more beautiful. It was, that aesthetics component of place attachment. And that made people want to start taking care of the vacant lots. And then some of the vacant lots were turned into community gardens. They managed to get a mural painted on the side of a building on the block. And it sort of blossomed into this really cool sense of placemaking and empowerment on what otherwise would just be like a really down and out struggling street. So, it's hard to change how welcoming a city is, and some cities have developed a reputation for not being very open to outsiders or for being racist or sexist. And those are difficult legacies that take a lot of effort and complex thinking to overcome. But even in really little ways, I think people who maybe are more on the outsides or feel marginalized in their communities can take control of the destiny of their place. Just doing little things that show that they care about it and they're invested. There was one study that came up in my research for the book that I write about that showed that people who have the lowest income levels were actually the most attached to their neighborhoods. And maybe it was because they were kind of stuck there. Maybe they didn't have the economic power to just pick up and move when things got bad, but that made them, want to double down and help the neighborhood.
So, and it's true enough. I mean, even in the most disadvantaged populations, everybody has something to give. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to make kind of that investing, the barrier to entry on that investing easier, how to convince people that they have something to give.
One group that I really admire is in Charleston, South Carolina. It's called Enough Pie. And this was a group that, was funded by a private investor named Kate Nevin, who used her own money to start this nonprofit in North Charleston, which is largely an African-American community, a community that has been cut off by the freeway from downtown Charleston, where all the tourists go and all the pretty things are. It is a very different part of Charleston. But they have made an effort to invest in the community. And one way they've done that is by, planning events that all people have to do is turn up to, like come help us yarn bomb, this lamp post, or, we're going to hire muralists to come paint beautiful murals on the sides of buildings. And, you don't necessarily have to do anything, just come help out in a small way or come see what we're doing. They've built community gardens. But my favorite project of theirs is they do mini grants. They offer $1,000 grants to people who come up with a good idea for their community. So for one person, it was making a mosaic hopscotch board to go in a community garden, and another person came up with like a public poetry project. So they're giving away small amounts of money that make it easier for people in the community who have a good idea to bring it to fruition. There are a lot of people who, because of their economic circumstances, the difficulty of their lives, are probably not going to have time to do a public poetry project. But I think, there are ways for even the most disadvantaged people to get involved. And a lot of it, just revolves around reaching out to your neighbors, developing a neighborhood watch, throwing a block party, something like that, and maybe things that they already do, but that help build those connections in a community and that help a community advocate for itself.
And we've talked a lot about, the onus on the individual to kind of push the community forward and the community building itself in many ways. I wonder, where do you think government and bigger institutions fit into trying to create these welcoming places?
I think city government has a lot of power, the most power in a community to change the way things are done. I think that's why Roanoke has been really successful in, building CityWorks Expo and creating a culture of I'm going to do it in Roanoke, a culture of let's get something cool started and make it happen, because there are, there's a city manager and other city leaders who are incredibly supportive of it and who embrace change. I wanted in the book to focus on things that the average person can do. I think sometimes it's easy for us to sit back and be like, well, my city government sucks, and, my mayor will never go for this idea, and they're doing everything wrong, and that's why, my town is going downhill. And so I wanted to put a little of that power back in the hands of individuals, to think, less about, oh my gosh, the school system or the police force, those things that can seem so big and overwhelming, that we really can't control unless we're elected officials, and to think smaller about things that, the average, not rich, not elected, not president at something person can pull off in their neighborhood or their town. But government can make a huge difference in how, how people feel about their city. Speaking of making your city more open, a town in North Carolina used, some of the things that they learned from the book and started a welcome party for people who were new in their community, where they had a day where they opened up City Hall and representatives from different parts of the government were there, explaining what they did, and, they had food and stuff like that. And it's a pretty simple gesture, but as a gesture, it goes a long way toward telling people who are new to your community that you want them there and that we're going to do everything we can to, realize your goals in this town. So, I think the biggest thing that people can do is, communicate with your government officials about things that aren't just complaints, but about things ideas you have for making your town better. And then, of course, the big one is run for office yourself. I get really happy when I see, young people run for office, because to me, that's, the ultimate act of investment. You're willing to do this really difficult thing of, campaigning and sitting in this office for, years sometimes, in order to make your city better. And to me, there's no better manifestation of place attachment and place love than that.
Well, absolutely. And I'll just throw in a little pitch here that you don't even have to run for office, I don't think. There's a ton of appointed boards in most communities that would love to have people that are not traditionally on those boards be part of them. So I almost guarantee that if you want to get involved in city government in some ways, that there is a way to do that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. When I lived in Iowa, I hadn't even been there a year, and I saw an ad in the newspaper about, some openings on city commissions, and one of them was the local library board. And I'm a library geek. This is what I do. I love libraries. And I kind of felt like, that would be an interesting way to get involved. And I, filled out their little online form. And within a few weeks, I found myself on the library board. And I did that for, 5 years while we lived there. And looking back, at the time I was like, I can't believe they put, a 28-year-old with zero city government experience on the library board. But looking back, they were thrilled to have a different voice on the board. And it was a fantastic education for me too. When you're sitting on a city commission or a city board, it's like you have a backstage pass to what makes your city work and what makes it tick. And that breeds place attachment. It creates this sense of ownership that, this isn't just the library, it is my library. And, this isn't just the city where I live, it is my city. And I'm part of what makes it work.
That's absolutely true. Well, I wonder if we can wrap up by you sharing a story that you think kind of encapsulates what you've learned through all this, and that you think is touches on a bunch of these points that you've made.
Because that is not a tall order at all. The encapsulating story. A story that I shared at CityWorks Expo and that I love talking about is about Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo is one of the places I visited when I researched my book, and I will be honest that the reason I went there is, yes, I had heard it was a cool town and that there were some interesting placemaking efforts going on there, but really it was because I needed to complete my list of states that I had visited in America, and I knew that I would never go to North Dakota. I would never choose to go there. And I think that's probably how most Americans think about North Dakota is, this is the state that we never want to go to and have no interest in. The most flyover part of the flyover part of America. And so I went there, and what I discovered is a town that has completely changed its sense of identity around what is possible in Fargo and how outsiders think of Fargo. Fargo has for a long time just been like the really creepy movie, right? Where the leg is in the wood chipper, and no one wants that association with their town. But one of the people that I met when or out of my meetings in Fargo was a guy named Joe Burgum. And Joe's just your average guy. He's in his 20s, and he's just really devoted to the town. So when things come up that he wants to see improved in Fargo, he just does them. He helped start the farmers market in Fargo. He developed an alley fair in Fargo that highlighted the back alleys of downtown and, brought music and food there. He created a mobile sauna, a sauna on wheels that would help make Fargo's winters easier to bear. And I think of people like Joe as a prime example of what I wish more people were like. And what I want people to get out of the book. I want more people to say yes. Excuse me. To say yes to their communities, to say yes to opportunity in their community, to say yes to making things better. I just had a table at the Virginia Festival of the Book, and a lot of people, I was doing a little placemaking activity, and I was having people write down, what I love about my town. I live here and I love it because, and excuse me, most people had no problem thinking of answers, but I did have quite a few people come up and say, I don't know if I do love where I live. It's ugly, or I haven't made any friends, or whatever. And not to discount those experiences. They're very real, and not every town is going to be a great fit for us. But I think when you're in a place, and especially a place that you don't like, you sort of owe it to yourself to make an effort to change how you feel about it. And that's, one of the main things I've learned about place attachment is it's malleable, and you can increase it through your behaviors, through your engagement, and through your willingness to try to love where you live.
Well, thank you so much, Melody. And I'll just piggyback personally and say that I've found everything you've said here to be absolutely true for my own story here in Roanoke. And so I appreciate you putting that into words and taking that message all over the country. And for those of y'all listening, if you like what you hear, you can hear Melody's talk from last year's CityWorks on our website at cityworksexpo.com. And thank you so much for being with us today, Melody.
Thanks so much for having me, Brad. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps other people find out about our fascinating guests and find the information that we have to share. Lastly, please save the date for our upcoming event, October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia, and keep up to date by following us on Facebook and checking out our website, cityworksexpo.com. That's cityworksexpo.com. Thank you guys again, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.